Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today sitting down to talk about the future of Halo Infinite and 343. While the news necessarily isn't that shocking, it's more so the pace at which everything has occurred at that has me caught off guard. I'm really stunned by how fast this has moved to the point where Bonnie Ross is now out at 343. We'll be going over her letter today, but of course, for those who need a brief recap on what's going on with Halo Infinite, when the game launched early on November 15th during Xbox's 20th anniversary, it was a time for celebration because it signaled to fans that the game was in a great state and the wait would be worth it. Why is that? Well, let's be honest with ourselves, games never launch early. This year is a bit of an exception. We saw Marvel Midnight Suns get moved back, then get moved up. We've seen something like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 move up in its release cycle. There are those rare exceptions. This year in particular saw a higher count of 2, but otherwise when things are moved up, it's typically a good sign that the game is in a wonderful technical state, that it's content ready to go, and that support is already on the way. Nothing quite like that happened for Halo Infinite. As the game came out, it was absolutely the talk of the town for about 7 weeks and fell off really quickly because support wasn't there for maps, modes, bugs and glitches like custom games still being broken, theater mode still not working great, and core pillars to the Halo franchise such as Forge and campaign co-op were missing but were promised to be coming down the line. Now, fans have lost their patience as 10 days ago we talked about how there would be a delay to features within Halo Infinite's roadmap. Most notably would be that campaign co-op got pushed back again. It's coming out this winter in the winter update on November. And also that local campaign co-op has been cut. It became an infinitely worse look for 343 when fans had found a way to get split screen co-op working, and it worked just fine. But 343 cemented it as a lack of resources, which spoke to the importance of the Halo franchise and left people like me really upset because then I came out, made a video saying this franchise needs to be treated better. You can say what you will about PlayStation, Nintendo, certainly we have our critiques of the 3 big companies that lead gaming. But the reality is that 2 of them treat their flagship IP with some level of respect. Xbox has not, because 343 has continued to trickle out Halo games with major caveats, whether it be Master Chief Collection. Oh, this is great, but my God, that launch was catastrophic and it took like 5 years to get this game in a functional state. Or Halo Infinite, the core is great, but there's no real content additions. Or Halo 5, man, this campaign's terrible, but at least the multiplayer is kind of fun, but it's a sweat fest. Or Halo 4, hey, that campaign actually wasn't too bad, but the multiplayer was dead after 2 weeks. That's the problem. 343 has not been able to steer this ship in the right direction. So in turn, people called for blood. They called for change. I called for change, and I made that video directly speaking to Xbox, and change is coming. The timing is absolutely suspicious. We will discuss that, but for now, let us read Bonnie Ross's letter and then talk about some changes in 343's leadership. She writes, "While I had hoped to stay with Halo until we release the winter update, I'm letting you know I will be leaving 343 and attending to a family medical issue. I am incredibly proud of the work everyone at 34 Industries has done with Halo Infinite, the Master Chief Collection, the Halo television series, and so much more. It has been an honor to serve alongside the team for the last 15 years and to be a part of a universe that I love. Thank you to everyone in the Halo community for your support. Halo's future is bright. I cannot wait for you all to experience what we have in store and to cheer alongside you as a fan at the Halo World Championship in October." From there, we received a report from Windows Central Gaming where they write, "Studio veteran and production lead Pierre Hintz will become studio head of 343 effective immediately, leading the studio's ongoing development of Halo Infinite and the Master Chief Collection, as well as future games. The senior leadership team will expand with new roles, including Brian Koski, who will become GM of franchise, and Elizabeth Van Wyck, who will oversee business and operations." Now, there is an employee spotlight over on 343 that was posted in September of 2018, talking about Pierre, the new head of 343 Interactive, and it's there that it's highlighted that his goal was to focus mostly on legacy products within the Halo franchise. That means most notably getting 343 Industries to put Halo Master Chief Collection in the right place and steer the ship into a more successful position, which he helped do. So now this gentleman has moved up into a leadership role to be the head of studio, and things are changing mighty quickly. Now, of course, I feel before we move any deeper into the conversation, the elephant in the room sort of needs to be addressed here. First of all, best wishes to Bonnie and her family, but I think there is reasonable skepticism here, and I think there's a way to air that without being tasteless. because I do think it is completely fair to say, okay, 10 days ago, there was a trending meltdown on YouTube, trending meltdown on Twitter. The internet was only talking about the poor state that Halo was in and the continued missed goals, missed marks, moving things back. It was not a good time for them. And then you're telling me 10 days later that the exit has been accelerated. I'm not saying that there isn't a family issue here. It most likely does exist, but it certainly does allow Bonnie to leave with a sort of grace. Why is that important? The talk around Halo Infinite has been very toxic. Before even the game's launch, it has been toxic. 343 has seeded a lot of bad will. If you were to validate the internet by having a general 343 post come out saying we have let Bonnie Ross go, it would be such a mega W for a crowd of people that would be incredibly toxic towards the actual company, towards Bonnie, and it would lead to a PR disaster. So to me, I'm not denying there is this existing medical issue. Best wishes again to Bonnie and her family. But I do think this allows her to leave the company with some sort of grace. As we've seen time and time again, many of you have worked within companies where someone has the option to say, I am leaving gracefully before they are pushed out the door. And I think, again, the timing here is just too suspicious. But I wanted to address that before moving into the much broader conversations, which is, what does this mean for the future of Halo Infinite? Does this put them on the path to success? In some instances, you could argue yes, but I think the reality is that the focus here needs to be better. For example, when all that information was dropped just 10 days ago about what's happening with local campaign co-op being cut, we learned two things, I believe, through that. Number one, there's still a resource shortage over at 343 apparently. Whether that be resource shortage where Xbox has given them an abundance of cash, an abundance of assets to work within, and 343's just dropped the ball, or Xbox says, we've given you a long enough leash, you have to work with what we give you. We cannot continue to invest endless money into you. Whichever it may be, there was a sign there that there is not enough resources being poured into the current flagship IP. That was the worrying sign, number one. Number two was their consistent talk about Halo as a competitive game. And the comments spoke loud and true, and I agree with that sentiment. I think Halo should first and foremost be a fun, casual game, and just like Fortnite, become something much more than that in a competitive level, because a player with a wild skill set had elevated the game thanks to the tool set the game had provided. So they should focus on fun first and do something like sweaty multiplayer later. Otherwise, you're going to be running down the road into Halo 5 again. Skill-based matchmaking, that type of stuff. So right now, I still think there are a multitude of visionary issues, support issues that make me not super confident moving forward. Things are just going to be fixed. But what this does mean is right now in your leadership position, you have the man who is largely responsible for leading the charge with Master Chief Collection and putting it on the right tracks. A game that was in a disastrous state and had a poor reputation until things really started to get going with support, with new games being added, with new modes being added. Just, it was insane. It was getting seasons, and that seasonal content was fair. So there is hope in that regard. But one thing I also noticed here in the letter is that the role of Bonnie Ross has effectively been split into three people, a hydra of sorts. You have the new head of studio, and then they also focus on the shakeup of Brian Koski being moved into GM of franchise. I did some research on Brian. I had to do a little, what I like to call LinkedIn creeping. I don't like to do it because it just feels like I'm kind of being overly invasive here. But I did learn that Brian has worked with Microsoft for a very long time, being GM of marketing for a number of various important Xbox IP. These are IP like Forza, like Fable, so on and so forth. So he's been involved with them for a while. This seems like a natural escalation of his duties. It seems like someone who's capable. And then Elizabeth Van Wyck has moved into overseeing business and operations, which again works for her, just given her pedigree. Again, very much rooted in Microsoft for a long period of time. So these are people who have been in the company, have been familiar with where things are going, and are moving up. So to me, that's somewhat encouraging, but the reality is, and I don't mean to be stubborn here, but I kind of have to stand on my square because I think it's too soon to call for the saving of Halo Infinite through these changes. You can't have 4 releases in a row, minus any co-developments, like something such as Halo Wars 2. All of them have wild controversy surrounding them in one way or another. You can maybe excuse Halo 4, it's their first time and they can learn lessons from that, but their next outing was arguably one of the most mismarketed games of all time and one of the most lackluster FPS campaigns that's dropped. So it wasn't necessarily a step in the right direction. But I'm still looking for the type of change over at the Halo franchise, which is limiting 343's hands-on time with it. If you want to limit their scope to just Infinite support and Master Chief Collection support, great. But I still think this franchise needs to go elsewhere. I'm sorry. I am willing to give the State and Era a chance, but let that State and Era work on Infinite and put that in a successful position. Otherwise, time to start throwing out the Halo IP elsewhere. I still think it's time to test with all the various FPS studios that you have within your Xbox family. I think it would be foolish to not test the waters on that. I'm just going to remind people, I've been saying this before, Halo Infinite was controversial, and certainly now I think it should only be emphasized that this IP deserves a breath of fresh air. I think it can be more than just the dude bro first-person shooter, which I love, by the way. I do think it could be more than that. I think there are so many ideas, like a Halo Tactics game, a Halo RPG. Like, there's so many ways you could toy with the franchise like you have with something such as Gears of War, with its very popular Horde mode, which ended up being a major staple within the franchise. Of course, things like Gears Tactics. I think that there's just so much room to bring Halo to a new level. There's a reason why Halo Wars was so popular. Halo Wars 2 was so popular. That type of experimentation is absolutely embraced. And I think Halo as a flagship IP deserves to see a little more shine on that front. So overall, the news itself may not surprise you, but I think the pace definitely should. This moved pretty quickly, suspiciously quickly. It's time to go into the reparation phase. You got the new leadership set up here at 343. You've likely got a game plan on how you want to recover Halo Infinite. We know about the leaked Battle Royale. We know the roadmaps there. We're going to get stuff like Forge, which is looking really encouraging, by the way. Forge has always looked great. We always assumed Forge would help 343 get new maps into the game. In fact, 2 maps are actually going to be injected from Forge into the main game. So that type of stuff is great. But that does not mean that the franchise needs to rest solely in their grip. That control needs to be wrestled free from them, and it needs to be licensed out to other developers within the Xbox first-party family. Too much talent there, especially when you bring in Activision Blizzard. Too much talent in there to not mess around and see what you can find out about this IP that you didn't previously know. I think Halo Master Chief Collection on Switch is something you should continue to investigate. People had thought maybe that would be a play since Xbox has teased the Switch in the background so many times. So yeah, I'm all for that experimentation. But overall, new leadership is in place. We'll see how encouraging it is. Shout out again to Bonnie Ross for all of her time spent on the Halo franchise. Thank you for what you've done, Bonnie. Best wishes to your family. And I'm curious to see where the Halo franchise goes from here. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. Please do fire away. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. And a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the hell out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.